Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Good evening and welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I have Ken Quiethawk to thank for that amazing intro, and please visit him at his website, nativestorytellers.com. He and his wife have an amazing website there, and the storytellers are a form of passing history on to future generations. And in many ways, we seem to have lost that talent and that capability. We assume that everybody's going to read our books or listen to our blogs, and having a verbal history is something that would not be a bad idea for us during these days of strangeness, and certainly they get more unusual every day. So check it out, because the Native American First Peoples stories are just phenomenal, and they do tell about their history and origin and the magic that evolution holds for every culture, every species, everybody. Tonight we have a fabulous show. I'm very, very excited. We have best-selling author Dr. Rita Louise, and she's a consummate researcher who passionately explores topics such as ancient mysteries, ufology, mythology, health and healing, ghosts, intuition, and the paranormal. In other words, she covers it all. She's the author of 5 books and the producer of a number of feature-length film shorts. She has appeared on radio, television, film, has spoken at conferences around the U.S., and her writings have appeared in books, magazines, and newsletters around the world. For more information on this amazing lady, you can visit her website, soulhealer.com, and sort of experience what she's been into. I have to say that she's probably covered about every topic that fascinates me, and 2 hours is not going to be long enough to plumb the depths of her wisdom, but we're going to give it a shot. Welcome to the show, Dr. Rita.
Hey, Barbara, and thanks for having me on tonight.
Oh, you know, ever since I started on Blog Talk Radio 9 or 10 years ago, I guess, you have been one of those people that every time I've run across your name, it's like, dang, I have to get her on the show because she has so much information to share. It's sort of like you have delved into just about every topic that fascinates me, and some that I didn't know about.
Well, now you're making me feel like a superstar.
You are a superstar. It amazes me. You know, I am so fascinated with so many different aspects of our being here on this planet and where we came from and all of that, and of course, you know, the extraterrestrial stuff as well. So that, you know, it's just, you've had the time and the energy to delve into and research in depth so many topics that fascinate me, and if I had, 5 or 10 more lifetimes, I would probably try to delve into a lot of them too. It's just that there's so much out there that we don't know. It's hard to know where to begin.
Exactly. And for me, I just and this is going to sound goofy. Well, maybe not to you, but, I just wake up and Spirit says, here, like, we want you to do this. And it's like, oh, okay. And that's really how it always starts. It's, I don't really have an intention of doing something. And then it's kind of like, okay, it's time. It's true story, Barbara, and you will so appreciate this. So it was like October, like 14 years ago, and I get this message, it's time. And I'm like, okay, time for what? And it's like, time to start a radio show. And I'm like, and I was much shyer than I was much shyer then than I am today. I've really gotten over a lot. And and then I was like, oh, okay. And they go, oh, yeah, you have to air your first show in January, which means, like, and here's the list. Have to have a webpage, have to have guests, have to have a network.
Yeah.
Oh, and it was like, okay. Yeah, and I aired that first January, the first week in January. So.
Yeah, it is, I have always said that if you are paying attention, Spirit speaks to you and gives you direction, and you just go in that direction. And 10 years ago, somebody asked me to be a guest on their show, and, I said, well, where do I have to go? They said, just pick up your phone. You're kidding me. And so I did, and I did their show, and then I called the gal the next day, and I said, can I come watch you do a show? Because that was really cool. I didn't have to get dressed. I didn't have to do my hair. I didn't. It was fabulous. And so I went. I went and I watched them do it, and I said, well, hell, I can do that. And within a month, I don't think I did it as fast as you did, but within maybe 2 months, I didn't even think about half the stuff you mentioned, which would have been intelligent, but it was like, no, I can do this. And when I realized that I was going to be on the air suddenly for 2 hours, it was like, okay, smarty pants, now what are you going to do? And it it was like, I never thought about that. I just figured, I can do this. This looks really easy. And for some reason, even though I am not a techie, it was easy. And not only that, there is a mystique connected to radio that absolutely is so exciting to me. It's unbelievable. I mean, you can't see my cats walking back and forth in front of the screen. You can't see it when a cat drops a mouse in the middle of the kitchen and chases after it, and I have to find it while being calm and intelligent. There's so much that being on the radio hides that is just amazing. And it's magical. And for some reason, it doesn't frighten me the way standing in front of a television camera did, or in front of a group of 500 or 600 or 1,000 people. For some reason, there is such intimacy connected with the radio that it's a piece of cake.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter. Actually, there have been times when I began that I didn't know if anybody was listening or not. So I set a mirror up so that I was talking to myself, because otherwise you're talking in a monotone if there's nobody else there. And it became a form of therapy. It's like, let me tell you about this and let me tell you about that. And then suddenly there were calls, and suddenly the whole thing just, I felt like, Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, let's do a show. And off we were. But it was exciting. But you've got so many areas that you have delved into and really researched amazingly. And I am just, there's so many different directions I want to go. But the first direction I want to go is I recently have had the honor of reading your Stepping Out of Eden, which has fascinated me, and it's a topic, of course, that everybody wonders, who are we and where do we come from? And it's not quite the same story as a little boy who came to his mother and said, Mommy, where do I come from? And she sat him down and gave him the lecture, and She was all prepared. She was a little scared, but all very prepared. And when she was all done and the sweat was pouring off of her, she said, "Well, does that explain it all?" And the kid looked at her and said, "Well, not really, because Marty came from New Jersey. I wondered where I came from." And
I've never heard that one.
Really?
Really?
Oh, I love that story. I just so whenever my son asked a question, I asked him to be a little more specific so I knew exactly where to go with it. But can you imagine, after all of that preparation and everything, where do you come from? Oh. Yeah, no, it was, for anybody that has children, it's an easy mistake to make. So I tried not to fill in too many blanks. Hopefully his friends filled in the ones I missed. But and they probably did a better job. But where we come from is something that all of us have really, they tell us in school that we evolved from the apes and stuff like that there, and yet that's been something that I just didn't resonate with. And then when you talk about primitive men, I don't think they were primitive. I think that they had, you talk brain capacity and all of that. I have trouble thinking that we really evolved from those primitive people, yet maybe we did. And you've done such amazing research on first of all, what it takes, what is it that makes us human? And that's a good place to start. What does make us human?
Well, the thing that makes us human are all the intangibles. And so when I brought this topic up, on a lot of shows, especially with people that haven't read the book or haven't thumbed through it, they have this belief that I'm talking about archaeology and bones and evolution of man, which I do talk about in the book because it's really part of the story, not that, we're, and whether you believe in evolution or not, or, genetic engineering or, whatever it is, it's still, we have fossil evidence of it. So it has to be part of the narrative. But the reality, short of bones and artifacts that are found, I mean, that's just structurally, that's just the 3D part of us, and no one really looks at how did we, that inside part, consciousness, information, brain power, culture, habits, traditions, where did that all come from? I don't know that I've ever read a book that even thought to tackle that topic.
Well, and it's a great topic because when you stop and think about primitive people, they really aren't primitive. They just don't think the way we think. And I've often thought that when you talk about the earlier cultures, they had a richness about them and a connectiveness to the environment, among other things, that was so profoundly wonderful, and it's something that we have lost as we quote unquote have evolved.
Exactly.
So that there has always been a level of intelligence that was profound. And even though they don't have they didn't have iPhones, or they didn't have computers, or they didn't have books, but the wisdom that they had was so much greater than, I think, in many ways, the wisdom that we have now.
Oh, very much so. And they had different skill sets. So if you gave, Cro-Magnon man or early Homo sapien sapien, or even a person 2,000 years ago, as you said, an iPhone, or put them in front of a computer or stuck them in a car, they would be totally lost and have no clue. But you can take somebody that grew up in New York City or San Francisco or Dallas or L.A. and put them in the middle of the wilderness, and they are going to be just as lost as the primitive man, you know, because we were not trained with the same skill sets.
Well,
you know, so it's not intelligent, it's skills.
There's a video out there someplace. I've seen it a couple times, and it's a bunch of teenagers given a rotary phone and told to make a phone call.
Oh yeah, and they have no clue.
They haven't a clue at all, and it's like, okay, this is ridiculous, but it happens, and I think that a lot of the skills and the talents that the native people, the people that were living with the environment, I mean, you can tell it's going to rain when the leaves turn over. And most people don't know that.
I think that what they – oh, go ahead. I mean, I think they had to know far exceeds where we are today. You know, because now if we don't know something, we go online or we get a book. I mean, I remember, well, I don't want to say growing up, but, you know, in my adult life, you know, before the internet, you know, I would work on my car and I would get my Chilton's manual out, you know, and read the instructions, you know, and they didn't even have instruction manuals. And so, you know, they're tanning hides and hunting food and doing all of this stuff that today, I don't know that we have not practiced, how's that, the intellectual capacity to remember that level of stuff anymore. We have become much more used to being able to look something up, you know, and access reference material versus storing it somewhere in your head.
Well, and also I think that we have lost a great deal of our communicative skills as well. If you go way back, there was a time frame where the group had even a group memory of things that where they could share memories, they could share thoughts, and now today, you know, people don't talk as much. They don't share information verbally, and they rely upon technology to give them the wisdom that they are too lazy to grab for themselves. And don't get me wrong, I love Google and I love the internet and being able to get all sorts of amazing information. But if you don't incorporate it into your own inner wisdom and then share it with other people, what's the point?
Well, and I think that they also had a certain level of, you know, I'm going to say it this way, psychic ability, you know, just based on the lifestyle and the tradition that they lived, you know, that people were more in tune to their bodies, more in tune to subtle energy, more in tune to the animals around them and nature in general, you know, that there was, you know, verbal communication, nonverbal communication, but then there was also that subtle level of communication that I think people were more in tune to. I think people were more open to receiving it. I mean, if you look at today's world, and it's changing, slowly but changing, you know, it has been drummed out of Western consciousness, you know, and it makes me laugh, you know, because they're like, oh, well, scientists have discovered that, you know, these things communicate with each other, and we can sense things that are around our body, and it's kind of like, duh. It's like indigenous people, you know, people in other cultures have known that. Oh, and that happens by means of, chakras. See, there's even a word for it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and they go around in the Western world like they made some new discovery, but it's not freaking new.
And because it's not technology, people tend to, you know, sort of veer away from it. And I find it fascinating 40 years ago, 50 years ago when I started out in this field, if anybody had known the things that I was interested in, I mean, I could have lost my job as a school teacher. It was reason for firing me, because they would have said, she deals with the occult and stuff like that, which was never the case. But it's sort of like, when you get to those points where you are trying to blend in with the environment, when you're trying to understand the energies around yourself and other people, when you're trying to, get a deeper understanding of situations and people, you're using those qualities. And of course, way back, they did that. They hunted that way. They established their healing centers and stuff like that by watching where the animals went to heal, and then they kind of gathered around those particular areas that had the energies that was helping the animals to heal, and then they built their healing centers on that. And they were more aware and more tuned into the environment around them than we are today.
Mhm. And it's not that we don't have that, and it's not that we don't have that capability. We just haven't been taught to use it. I offer training for energy medicine, to work as an energy medicine practitioner, intuitive counselor, or medical intuitive. It's an online distance training. And people, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, well, do you have to be psychic to do this? And it's like, well, yeah, but my belief is that we're all psychic. And my job, I'm not going to teach you how to be psychic. What I'm going to do is to teach you how to be aware of the gift that you already naturally possess, and help you tune that in and hone that muscle, so that you can do this work. It's not about me giving you anything or opening up your chakras. People go, well, you need to open up your chakras. It's like, no, not really.
Yeah, they're already open.
Yeah, pretty much.
No, it is amazing how we are starting, how just of late, within maybe the last 10 years, people have been more and more open to the energy fields, have been open up to, and I'm not negating out all other sciences and things like that, but it is amazing how, we've had all these talents, these skills for so very long, and superstition has gotten in here and told us this is bad, this is wrong, this is a no-no, and so people have had an adverse reaction to all of the holistic energies and the way to use them. And when in your book you mention how way back, I don't know, 40, 50,000 years ago or before in the ancient times, that there were wise people, shamans, if you will, that were found in their burial, and they had all sorts of herbs and things like that scattered around them, as though this is knowledge and wisdom that is millions of years old, maybe. And we're just getting around to remembering it. And it, you kind of shake your head.
And that's the joke. And I kind of point my finger a little bit, at the Catholic Church. I mean, I don't have anything against Christianity and the beliefs that they have. However, they did, I don't want to say humanity, they did the Western world a huge disservice, because they disconnected us from our truth, and they disconnected us from the world around us. So you're sitting there saying, there were all of these, prohibitions that were put around, this kind of stuff, but it was only in Judeo-Christian cultures and more in Christian cultures where it was made bad. If you were a midwife or an herbalist, you were bad. And, and so it's just really sad. And so it's not even that we're refinding it. It's like we're breaking down the walls of this amnesia, this forced amnesia, that was imposed on people, and I get, well, but it's not like that. You can't just say that. It's like, well, you go to India or Australia or the Native American cultures, and they don't have those beliefs, and the only reason that it's spread so far and wide is when the European expansion happened and they annihilated culture, like indigenous culture, in society after society around the world, so that it became one of the most, common belief systems and thought forms around the world.
Oh yeah, and I think you're being too kind to call it expansion. I believe it was an invasion. And
well, it was an invasion, but they call it expansion.
Yeah, but they didn't take the time to listen to the people that were already here and learn how they were. I mean, they were okay with learning how to plant crops to grow and stuff like that, but when it came to their spiritual beliefs and their customs, they immediately termed them primitive and decided to bring them into the whatever century it was and make them Christians so that they could, blend in with though they weren't allowed to actually really blend in, but they wiped out some amazingly magical and insightful and productive and healing qualities that the native people had. Native First People, I don't know what the right term is anymore, but I mean even where was it? There was a cure. SEAC-T was. Are you familiar with that? It was a
from South America.
Well, I think.
Well, it's a combination. It's a combination. I take
yeah,
that back,
it may have come. But it absolutely cured cancer for a number of people, and when the nurse. I can't remember her first name now. It's her name backwards, but it was called SEAC-T, and she found out about it because she was treating a Native woman, and there was a scar, and the Native woman said, "Oh, that's where I had cancer." And when she investigated it, she got the recipe from a chief in one of the tribes, and she started using it on her patients, and she had something like 50,000 documented cures, and because it worked, they didn't let her use it, which, makes good sense. If it works, God forbid, you help people with it. Let's just make people.
If you can't make money off of it, it's not about whether it works or not.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Which is really pathetic.
Well, when my late husband had stage 4 lung cancer when it was actually discovered, and he used the SEAC-T, and it helped him tremendously. I mean, he still passed away, but he had a better quality of life because of it. And again, here's another thing where the powers that be are suppressing the things that come naturally, and depriving us of something that was developed by our species to use. And
but even natural stuff, there's all the, and I hate to take it here, but I think it's a case in point. There are so many benefits, people are identifying from CBD oil, which is made out of hemp, and there are a lot of people that have benefits from smoking marijuana or using oil that comes from the marijuana plant versus hemp, whatever. I'm going to kind of throw those into the same pot for a second. And there are places that don't want to, decriminalize it or legalize it even for medical use, and you hear, oh, well, Monsanto wants to, get in that game so that they can make it be a prescription so that they can make money off of it, or make it some kind of over-the-counter thing so that they can make money off of it versus letting you just, grow a couple of plants in your backyard if you feel like it.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
That's illegal. That's illegal, but you can buy it from us.
I have seen how it helps people in many different ways. And yeah, people abuse everything. People abuse the Internet I mean, so there are children that get people that get addicted to the games and things like that. So you can abuse anything and everything, but there, especially for the marijuana, I have seen people help tremendously with it, and like I said, there are people who will abuse it, and there are people who will want to outlaw it. But if there is a way of utilizing it that helps people, I think they ought to be allowed to actually use it. It doesn't make sense to me. So we have these people here in our culture now who are healers, who can use a lot of these different modalities, and then we have the other people on the other side that are saying, no, this is bad, this is evil, and then the large majority of the population is caught in the middle and having to make, a decision or a choice as to, how they're going to live their lives, and it's pathetic. I don't understand it. We are the same species, and yet we seem to be divided into the haves and the have-nots just about these days. I have this wisdom, but, if you use it, we're going to put you in jail. And is it fear? What is it that has, our species has become divided because of all of this crap.
Mhm.
And it's
well, that's
really
because it's about control. It's about, as you hear on the news, it's about controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
And having it be where, they have the power and you don't. I mean, if you have the power, let's say, through meditation or yoga or, energy healing to be well or commune with spirit or receive your own information from, your higher self or your spirit guide or whatever words you want to put there, it's kind of like it kind of cuts into their power and their control and dominion over you. And it just makes me think they talk about like Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. The Bible says that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, but it doesn't say that. So, somewhere some guy decided that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, and so regardless of what it says in the Bible, his interpretation has gone down from generation to generation. And we kind of chuckle at it now and, toss it into the dogma stuff. But that's really a lot of what happens or has happened is that, something that was sacred, something that was pure, something that was holy has been really watered down into something that has no meaning and has no power. I mean, the rituals that early cultures used had power. Today, not so much.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I think the one thing that I got out of your book that really fascinated me. Well, I got a lot out of it. It wasn't just one thing. But when a baby is born, you have literally a blank slate. If you give that baby to the animals of the forest, if they don't eat it, they will raise it. But what that child learns in that situation does not exactly make it the same kind of person that a baby who is born into a family of, intellectual whatevers, and they teach it language and they teach it this and they teach it that. It's kind of like there is really no difference between us and primitive us's. It's just a matter of what the culture, the surrounding environment has taught us. Because you speak of the feral children that have been found, and I found that fascinating about how they really don't adapt, or they may learn words but they don't integrate into society the same way a child brought up in the society would react. So what is it that makes us human. Both of those children, one raised by animals and one raised by people, they both have the same genetic type background, and yet what they become is so very different.
So people that aren't familiar with the concept of feral children, there have been over the years, I think, 100 reported cases of feral children. So I think we've all seen Tarzan, the movie Tarzan, where he's raised in the jungle, by the apes or the lions or whatever, and he grows up, into being a man. And so in the late 1800s, there was a young boy who they found in the woods, and he was the most severe case that has ever been uncovered. And when he was seen the first time, he was, they estimate, about 10 years old, and was running through the woods and would pounce on an animal and then pick it up and eat it. And so finally, this young boy came out of the forest and came into society. But he had no social skills. He had no language. He didn't, understand what living in a house was, or what wearing clothes was, or, how to eat with a fork. I mean, he had no understanding of society. And so they tried working with him, and especially with language, and they found that even though he could understand some words, he really couldn't grasp the concept of sentence structure and things like that. And so one of the things that they've concluded is, and there's quite a bit of research behind this on a number of different levels, is that, in the first few years of our life, that's really where we develop, our ability to use language. And so if you are born in the United States, you're more than likely to be trained English. If you're in China, you are likely to be trained Chinese. And as anyone probably knows, it's like if you want to learn a second language, or, they say that it's easier to teach a young child a second language because it's like those neural pathways haven't fully developed, and so it allows them to do that. And so, and they can't really take the concept of feral children and develop that. They can't just take a child and throw it out in the woods, and be like, here, we'll come back for you in a few years, because that would be really illegal. So they can only do it based on, ones that have been identified and reported, and studied. So they only have a handful. But where I think it's interesting is when you look at studies that have been done with apes, like Coco, who just a couple of years ago passed away, who was taught sign language. And she knew, over 3,000 words. That's a lot of words. And could speak in sentences, and was able to communicate with her handlers, And so how did that happen? Well, she was acquired very young, and they started working with her, doing sign language. And so she was at that place that she was able to learn how to utilize language, and there were one ape in particular, Lulis, who was actually born in captivity, and his mom, so his ape mom, when he was really tiny, started showing him sign language so that, he would be able to communicate. So there's things that we do that we instinctively teach our children because this is a skill that's needed in society, for you to do good. And his mom was automatically starting to teach him sign language. And it's sad because I guess a lot of those experiments stopped because he was one of the first apes born in captivity that interacted with humans, kind of like your dog, except more. You know what I mean? Because there's a different level of intelligence that the apes have than, a canine has. So I guess that all kind of went away, but I think it would be interesting to have had that continue to see if over a period of time, if his skills and abilities excelled and exceeded his mom's, and how that would ferret out into the next generation. I mean, I just think that would just be a really wonderful experiment.
It would
Although,
be,
did you hear that they put, just one short thing, did you hear that they put human cells into a chimpanzee, human brain cells into a chimpanzee or something like that? Make it be smarter? Yeah, so of course all the comments on Facebook, it's like, oh, Planet of the Apes.
But, it does, I am, not that I'm an expert, it's just that, I happen to not believe that we evolved from the apes. That's just me. And that I do believe that species-wise, we are a different species than the animals. That and there's scientific proof that they say that we did, and for some reason I can't connect to it. Maybe my next life I will or something. It just, to me, it doesn't feel right. But and here is another example of okay, so you are but wait, we're able to communicate with animals too. I mean, there are animal whisperers. There are people that are able to really communicate with animals, via sending pictures, not words, because they don't understand the words. But and I've done it with my cats. If I'm really thinking straight and have nothing better to do in my time, I did at one time think that it would be really cool to be able to send my cats messages and get messages back from them. And you can, because they communicate alpha theta-ish. You can send them a picture, they get it, they understand it, so long as it's not too complicated. But you can make that kind of connection and communication. So it's not that we're better than them, we're just different than them. And I really, I struggle still with, so where did we come from? Where did their term Homo sapiens sapien, where did we come from? I mean, there's skeletal evidence that we've been around for at least 1 million or so years, I think, isn't there?
For Homo sapiens? I mean, Homo erectus came on the scene about 1.5 million years ago, and then Homo sapiens after that, and then Cro-Magnon, which is Homo sapiens sapien, was about 40,000 years ago. And as you probably know from reading the book, one of the things I really like to do is to tie things back to the mythic record. Because I believe that that myth holds our history. And
I agree.
So many people poo-poo mythology, and it's like, oh, it's just archetypal images, and it's just a fantasy, and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know who came up with the belief, other than maybe the church, to sit there and negate every other religious tradition or, story that might have come through about the gods. But there have been a couple of things that have come through fairly recently that make you really go, okay, so maybe there is some truth to mythology. And I'd like to share this story. So this was in Smithsonian Magazine in April of 2017. It's this long article, but I'm just going to kind of condense it. That there was an Aboriginal group off the central coast of British Columbia that talked about a strip of land that didn't freeze during the Ice Age, which made it a place of refuge for early inhabitants in the territory. Okay, and so that is their tradition, that is their history. And, of course, everyone's like, nah, it can't be, blah, blah, blah. The usual line, And so a group of archaeologists went in and did a bunch of excavations in that region And so one of the things that they found was that there were some, okay, so let's see, they sifted through meters of soil and peat before hitting upon the charred remains of an ancient hearth. And so when they carbon dated it, it carbon dated to 14,000. Yes, I said that correctly, 14,000 years ago, which says that this story that they tell that this strip of land had been inhabited during the Ice Age is 14,000 years old. It gives credence to oral traditions. You know, and so they talk about the telephone story, and well, if, you know, we tell the story, it's going to change, but I don't think so. You know, I don't think people understand oral traditions. You know, they just don't get it. And, you know, because it's not that way. I mean, you know, I joke around, it's not in this book, it's in my other book, E.T. Chronicles, What Myths and Legends Have to Say About Humanity, you know, and I really get into this whole dialogue about oral traditions, you know, and you know, because there's just so much that people are slammed, you know, wanting to put any credence into a history being passed down orally. But if you think about it, and you're going to laugh, so you go ahead and do that. If you think about it, we all know the words to Jingle Bells, even though we only sing it one time a year. All right, we might not know the second and third verse, but we all know the words to at least the main chorus of it. You know, and so, you know, not that that's history, but that is information that has been passed on and on, you know, and on. You know, and so there are a lot of traditions. I mean, even like the stories, you know, that you find in the Bible. I mean, you know, they're passed on, and up until, you know, the last 100 years, the majority of people didn't read. But the tradition stayed because it was told over and over again. And I'll assume that the stories they told 500 years ago are the same stories that we're telling now in church. You know, because that oral tradition has held. I know, but, you know, what's good for the goose is not good for the gander. You know, so it's okay, you know, it's okay to baptize children in Christianity, but it's not okay to do ritual purification in an indigenous culture because that's heathen, even though what it's being used for to cleanse and purify the individual is exactly the same. I mean, the intention is the same. Why it's being used is the same. But, you know, we're not doing it in a church with a little basin, you know. They're doing it in a stream, you know. So that's bad. But what we're doing is good. And, you were talking about how, you know, when they went into these indigenous populations and didn't ask anything, and I think what they would have found out was that there was so much similarity between their beliefs and their cultures and their, you know, I want to say religion, or at least the traditions that support the religion, that, you know, and maybe they saw it, and maybe it scared them. You know, I don't know. But they sure were fast in, like, getting rid of it.
It just it does boggle the mind because you know, you know, like you said, Jingle Bells, absolutely. Look at saying the rosary beads. You know, the phrase just rolls off people's mouths to the point where they're not even thinking about what they're saying. It's just there. It's rote. I mean, that's how I learned my family history. I was bored to death by my mother and my grandmother for decades. Sunday nights, Sunday dinners, we heard the family stories over and over and over. I can say a lot of them in my sleep, and it's sort of like, yes, that's how you pass it down. And books get destroyed, and the internet goes out, but that verbal passage of wisdom, it continues like crazy. It's just amazing. And, you know, I I agree with you. I think that there is a great deal to be said to the foundation of our belief system. And if you go way back to what's recorded, and I guess it would be the Sumerian or before,
No, the Sumerian. Well, depends.
Okay.
You know, it depends on how much credence you want to give visual imagery as a vehicle of communication. You know, but the first written language, language versus tool of communication, you know, those have two totally separate dates.
But at least you have something physical in your hands, and that's what scientists need, I guess. And yet,
but they don't get it. But they don't. You know, I was in New Mexico, this is years ago, at a park that had a bunch of petroglyphs there. Mm-hmm. And in this one area, it was kind of like there was a petroglyph, and then you looked over there, there was another petroglyph, and over there was another petroglyph. So they were kind of in this like circle area thing. And there was an archaeologist there working, and he said something which I really didn't take much heed of, although it like stuck in my brain. And he said that they would come there and tell stories, and they would like do the story in the round. And so basically, you know, we can have a visual image, and from that visual image, understand an entire story. Do you think you and your listeners would want to do a little test?
Sure.
Okay, so I am going to describe a person just by his visual image. And when you know who it is, just yell out the name, okay?
Okay. Right? I'm the only one yelling, but go ahead, sure.
But okay, so he is a older white gentleman with a long white beard. He's a little bit portly. He's often dressed in a red suit with a big black belt and big black boots.
Sounds like Santa Claus.
That's who it would be. Now, with that one image in your mind, what do you know about Santa?
Well, aside from the fact that he lives at the North Pole and that he flies around once a year and gives gifts to children, not much.
Who does he hang out with? Who does he hang out with?
Reindeer.
And?
Mrs. Santa. Elves.
Elves? You know, so just from that one image, it's like you already know a whole lot about this guy who you've never met. He only turns up once a year, you know, and so they would use imagery, you know, so there might be some picture, some rock art somewhere, you know, which is why I was saying, you know, there's written language, but then there is this rock art where you could look at this image and know the story because you've been told the story. You know, the other example I like to use is like Da Vinci's The Last Supper. You know, and it's got the 12 guys sitting at the table with Jesus in the center. You know, and all you have to do, I found this picture years ago, and it was kind of like the Last Supper, you know, like the people were positioned like in the Last Supper, but they were all in contemporary clothing, sitting at a big picnic table with a big red tablecloth on it. You know, but if you're familiar with the Da Vinci imagery, you would immediately look at this thing and go, oh, it's the Last Supper. You know, and just with that visual image, we know this whole big story. You know, not just what was going on in that picture, but the extended background and, you know, what's going to happen after. I mean, way more than Santa.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and so, you know, so visual images, I mean, the church were masters at that. You know, you have a picture of creation. Well, everybody knows the creation story. You know, you have a picture of the Last Supper. You have a representation, you know, of different things. And you get, because of the information you get the whole background. And actually, you know, one of the films that I made, Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients, really gets into this whole concept, you know, because there's something in India that are called mudras, you know, and mudras are hand gestures that depict different concepts, you know, so, you know, like if you think of like Buddha, you know, and he's got his thumb and index fingers, you know, touching, and then his other fingers are like going off to the side, and I don't even know if that's like one that he does, but we'll just use that as an example, because everybody I think can like identify that one, you know, but that hand gesture has a meaning, you know, and if you do your hand in a certain other little way, you know, like the Italian hand gesture, we all know what that means. You know. You know, but it could mean, but in India, it could mean compassion. It could mean understanding. It could mean kindness, you know, and so depending on what's going on with their hands, imbued the image with a totally additional level of meaning. Well, we don't live in India, so we don't know what the heck they mean. You know, so that library... They could be saying, they could be using like Italian hand gestures on us, and we would never know.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Well,
you know,
so the Sumerian, quote unquote, written language is what, 6,000 years old, something like that.
The Sumerians came into power about 4,500 BC. I'm trying to think. I know that they have a lot of written evidence from about 2,500 BC, maybe a little further than that back.
So a lot of these pictographs that we have all over the planet predate that.
They either predate it or were, you know, came forward, you know, in cultures that didn't have a written language.
Mm-hmm. So,
you know,
you've got Nazca, you've got a lot of the caves in France, you've got, you know, pictographs in this country even, and it seems to me that there has been an effort of the species to preserve and to transfer forward wisdom, knowledge, information of some sort. We're just, in many cases, too dumb to figure it all out.
Well, I think we lost the library. You know, just like how we don't understand what the mood... So, did you ever watch that show, So You Think You Can Dance?
Yes.
You know, and so there's this one dance style that's called Bollywood. And they are jumping around, and because it's Indian... there's a lot of hand gestures that have all of these implicit meanings in it. And so during one dance thing, you know, they were dancing and they looked really good, except, you know, when the judges were talking about it, one of them said, well, you know, the dancing was great. He goes, but those hand gestures, you might have been cursing somebody out and not even know it.
This is true.
You know, because they're in that style. What you do with your hands is critical, because it's like sign language, you know, except different. It's more concept than words or letters. So,
but
we've lost the language.
Yeah, and the early Native Americans used sign language as part of their language, so that while perhaps the spoken words weren't the same, the hand gestures were. So we've certainly lost our ability to really communicate on a deep level. That's for sure. I look at things like the pictographs, like the hieroglyphs, like the Sumerian languages on the stones, and then I look at today, and 6,000 years from now, there are not going to be computers around. There are not going to be, frankly, if you wiped humanity out now, there would be no record of us that a future generation could draw from, because everything that we've done is not carved in stone. It's not being transferred one generation to the next. It's, well, you can always Google it, or have you checked out Ancestry.com? You want to learn about your relatives. There it is. You don't have to learn it. It's there. So in many ways, technology is dumbing us down.
It is. And we sit here and talk about things. They'll go to an ancient site and they'll pull something out. It's like, oh, it's for ritualistic purposes. Why is everything for ritualistic purposes? And one of the things that I talk about in Stepping Out of Eden is, is what they say really true? And you have to really kind of look at some of this material, with open eyes and a questioning mind. Because 5,000 years ago, based on your commentary, it's like there might be archaeologists digging through a trash bin, a trash dump site, because that will be left. And they might find a McDonald's cup, and think that we worship the God of the Golden Arches, and would that really be a true statement? So there's what we're digging up and making assumptions about, but what assumptions are going to be made about us? Are they going to pull out a pull tab thing from, a six-pack of beer and make some assumption about what it was used for?
It was, decoration, a necklace perhaps. No, that has always bothered me. A lot of the implements that they have dug up, especially in South America, it's for bloodletting, it's for this, it's for that. America's Stonehenge has a table. They call it the sacrificial table because there is an indentation around the outside that they're sure is used to drain blood off. But what if it were just a dinner table? What if they were messy eaters? Why do we make these guesses about antiquity that in many cases I think are so far off it's unbelievable. I'm sure there were blood sacrifices, the Aztecs, the Incas. They have pictures of it. So yeah, they must have done that. But why does everything have to be taken to an extreme? Why can't some of the flints? Why weren't they just to cut the meat so they could eat? Why did it have to be for killing or for this or for that? I sometimes think that the people that are defining and telling us what things are used for are just using their imaginations, and they could be wrong.
And putting it out as fact. And putting it out as fact. That's the part that irritates me the most and putting it out as fact. If they said, well, it could have been used for this, or, we think, but they don't. They put it out as fact. This is what it is. The theory of evolution is true. This is this. The Earth is flat. The Earth is round. We're 3,000 or 3, million light years. They don't freaking know. That just, don't get me started down that track.
But it's true, and when you start looking at, okay, so archaeologists, they try, God bless them, they do try. But all they're doing is guessing a lot of the time. And if you take that and you take a look at other aspects and areas of life, and in many cases even religion is just guessing. They don't know.
But it forms the foundation of our belief system.
Well, I know, but, it could be wrong.
Well, I'm not saying any judgment on right or wrong. I'm just saying that, and it forms the basis of our belief system and helps us make us feel stable in the world.
Yeah.
I wrote a piece on Göbekli Tepe, why they buried Göbekli Tepe. And, and so the current theories have been, or the other theories have been, that they buried it for posterity, because there was an impending war, and so they didn't want it to get messed up. That it was flooded, and this was just like rubble that backfilled it, and some other main reason. And so I looked at it from the positioning that it was buried because the land and the facility was considered taboo, and I get into this whole concept, not just Göbekli Tepe per se, but the whole concept of taboo in stepping out of Eden, and basically something was considered taboo if it was too blessed. So like the God King was blessed, so you couldn't touch him, you couldn't touch his stuff, or it was, an abomination, like touching blood or interacting with a dead person, that was bad, and it made you unclean, and so you would have to do ritual purification. And so if Göbekli Tepe was a place where the gods lived, because there wasn't any other structures around there, not really habitation around there, but if it was where the gods lived, then that site would have been like the Holy of Holies, and nobody could really go there. I mean, if you think of the tabernacle, that they built out in the desert, and only Aaron and the other identified Levites who wore their breastplates could go into the Holy of Holies, or else they would die. So if this place was that sacred, that holy, people go, well, they could reuse the stones. It's like, no, you can't, because the stones are holy. And so if you want to make sure that your great-grandchildren aren't going to take the stones that are so sacred and put them into a different building, what do? You have to destroy it, because that's the rules of taboo. You burn it, you bury it, or you throw it into the ocean. You get rid of it for posterity. And I believe that that's why they did that. And the reason I'm bringing it up is you wouldn't believe how much hate mail I got because I didn't offer the same theory as the other people who have put out theories that said, why go back? Like mine was irrelevant because it wasn't like what these other people that I guess are smarter than me, I don't know, had to say. And it's like, but they don't know either. So they just have a more popular name.
And you know what? I don't think we know the answer. I mean, Göbekli Tepe has always fascinated me, the engravings, especially on the oldest stone. I don't know if it's the oldest or the newest, but the one stone that they talk about with all of the engravings on it. Somebody had to do it, and was the engraving done by the gods or by man? And I have often wondered, looking at hieroglyphs and a lot of the other stuff that is connected to magnificent construction, that you kind of wonder how the heck did they do that. It's kind of like, okay, so I have to in some way accept the fact that there was technology being used in our far distant past that we have no knowledge of today. And it must have been, quote unquote, the gods. And I don't know
it
who
surely
the gods,
wasn't us.
Yeah, we didn't do it. If you look at hieroglyphs and how they are so meticulously done, some guy with a hammer and a copper tool did not do it. I'm sorry. If you look at many of the look at how the pyramid was constructed. To me, it just doesn't make sense to say, oh yeah, 40,000 men spent 20,000 years and here it is. Nah, I'm sorry. It doesn't make sense. I don't know who did it, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't the way people are saying. It's another theory, great, but I'm just not ready to follow along with everybody else saying, "Oh yeah, they built, ramps and they did this and they did that." I don't think so. Not with the precision. And were those early people, the Egyptians and the Incas and all of these thousands of years ago cultures, they knew about the stars, I'll grant you that. They had to. But how did they learn about them? And someone had to teach them. So who were the gods? You've got the Roman gods, the Greek gods, the Norse gods. You've got gods all over the place. But as when we were speaking earlier, they all seem to be the same people with different names. And I'm okay with it being aliens if you define alien as somebody not indigenous to this planet. I'm okay with that. I'm just...
Well, when you, we were talking earlier about the whole theory of evolution thing, but when you look at the mythic record, there's not one comment about a slow and gradual process. There are, all of the stories say that we were created by the gods, period. And there are multiple stories that talk about that there were multiple attempts at making, and I'm putting this in quotes, the perfect man. And so there's a Sumerian story that talks about, they made 7 attempts to make the perfect man. The first one couldn't stand up, and the second one couldn't urinate, and this one couldn't do this, and this one, so on the 7th attempt, they made the perfect man. In the Americas, we have stories about, there were 3 attempts done to make the perfect man. The first men were made out of mud, and when it rained, they melted. When they made the second men, but they got the clay element in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is part of that global narrative. When they made the second men, they were made out of sticks, but they weren't intelligent and they didn't worship the gods in the way they wanted, so they were annihilated. Then they made the final man, and they made these men out of corn, red, yellow, black, and white, which I think is interesting, which is the color of all of the, cultures around the world, skin tone of all the cultures. So we have multiple stories of these, not only one creation of humanity. And not that someone would recognize this off the top of their head, but in Polynesia, there's the tiki figure, and the tiki figure is this kind of deformed, head-turned, crooked-looking man person. And what that symbolizes is the first man, so is it really representing the first man that wasn't perfect and was kind of eliminated so that a new and improved version could be formed? So one of the things that I speculate in stepping out of Eden is that perhaps when we look at Homo robustus and Homo erectus and Homo this and Homo hablatus, perhaps these were these earlier attempts at making the perfect man. And that's why we find them in the fossil record, but but there's not a clear line of evolution from one to the other. And I don't think we're going to find a missing link, because I think it just jumps from one to the next. And so when you sit there and say, well, if God created humanity, then you're going, oh, well, now you're being a creationist. And it's like, well, it depends. It's like creationists believe that God, the guy with the white hair and the beard, created everything. But what if the definition of who and what God is just different? I mean, because basically people that follow ancient alien concepts they really are kind of creationists, except who they think God is not the guy with the white hair. It's actually a group of extraterrestrials who intervened in the development of humanity here on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Very different concept.
That definition I'm fine with. It's just, I think what happens is that sometimes that isn't enough, so people's imaginations starts going with, oh, it was the Pleiadians, or it was this, or it was that, or, I think that I am absolutely fine with acknowledging and saying, yeah, that probably happened, that a culture that was far above ours visited the planet and tried to help us along.
Well, I don't even know if that would be a true statement. They came and they intervened. It's like us giving monkeys, human brain cells so that they can become smarter. I mean, we sit there and poo-poo the concept of ancient aliens, but we're running around genetically engineering all kinds of stuff now.
Well, that's true too. I just,
so are we gods?
That. And what was the purpose of it? Was it, were we in some way, shape, or form somebody's science project for graduation?
I mean, you look at the mythic record, and it is abundantly silent in that way.
Yeah.
What is interesting is that humanity appears to be a very domestic species. Okay, and so when something is domesticated, it relies on outside care and outside intervention. And there's also a level of training that comes along with domestication. So you can take a dog and you bring it into your house and you domesticate it. You teach it not to poop in the house, and this is where your water bowl is. And, you can put funny hats on it if you start doing it when they're young enough, and they'll walk around with it forever,
Yeah.
And so I feel like our education, and the things that we do and how we came to be human versus animal is that we had very long-term and severe training. And once that training came into play, just like the ape that started teaching her baby sign language, we just self-fulfilled. We taught our children, and our children taught their children. And that process just kept going on and on and on and on, adding in new stuff as we moved along. One of the things that you find in myth, in addition to them creating us, is a consistent narrative of, and the gods gave us. The gods gave us fire, the gods gave us agriculture, the gods gave us metallurgy, the gods gave us... We didn't figure anything out. According to myth, humanity didn't figure anything out. And, and so was that also part of our training, that they would do another intervention and start giving people, the next level of information. There is this consistent commentary that domestication of plants started in the Middle East, in the Fertile Crescent, which is true.
Yeah.
That is where the earliest evidence is. However, there's a big however. Domestication of plants also occurred in China, and it also occurred in South America not long after the earliest evidence we find in the Fertile Crescent. Well, how did they get to South America with a different plant crop? So there was this level of education that came with it. And, but they like to just tell part of the story and not the whole story. It's, because when I was doing the research, my assumption was, that domestication happened. It happened in the Fertile Crescent because that's what you're told. And then it spread out, and somehow got to the Americas, Didn't even know if they had domesticated plants in the Americas. Didn't know. and or agriculture, agricultural, not domesticated, but agricultural stuff. Well, and it turns out that agricultural plants, where they were actually farming, started at like 8,000 BC, just after the advent of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent.
What a coincidence.
But the gods gave us agriculture. And they say the gods gave them agriculture, and the gods taught them how to weave cloth, and how to plant seeds, and the gods taught them all of that. Why make up those stories?
Well, good point. And if there indeed has been intervention at different times, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Aztecs, all of them, and it feels like it's almost time for another intervention.
Well, there are some people that speculate that speculate that a lot of the advanced technology we have, has come from downed crafts that have been back engineered. And so instead of picking select individuals and training them, that they're just kind of like throwing the technology out there for us to find and then working with it because we're advanced enough. But then there are others that speculate, that we're still communicating with extraterrestrials and they're the ones giving us the advanced technology and the advanced know-how. But it's covert. It's not out there in the open. Now it's like, GE came out with this new wonder product. Velcro.
So
we have Velcro now.
So we've gone from deifying these people to people. If they are similar to us as far as appearance and everything, then we deified them originally, and now we are, if there is a connection,
hiding
keeping
them.
it quiet. Yeah. I mean, like,
that's because it's all about the money. It's all about the money. I mean, which is the sad and scary part. The money.
Who taught us about money?
Well, we find a really interesting change that happens with the formation of agricultural society. And so when people lived in hunter-gatherer society, it was a little bit rougher, because if it was a bad winter, you might run out of food, or, if you're hunting, too many people are hunting in the same area, you might not find any animals. You know what I mean? So there are definitely risks tied to that.
Yeah.
But they had a lot more freedom, and they could just pick up and go. And if they didn't want to do something, as long as they had food, they were fine. When we started to develop agriculture, it was more labor intensive. It turned into a society where there were the property owners and the people that worked on the land. And so it really forced, if there wasn't already a caste system in place, it really enforced one, where there were those in charge and then there was everybody else. And so I will assume that money came in along with that. But I think even before that, though, people traded. There's evidence of, trade happening around, the world, where shells that are from Africa have been found in Europe. But it wasn't until, I think, the Sumerians that they started to come up with a symbolic representation for stuff, for money. I mean, it might have been earlier than that, but I would kind of stick it into that area.
Well, when you look at the gods, and then you bring the aspect of the gods forward. Now there's just, for many, one God. If it does come to fruition, if people are presented with the fact that those people that we thought were gods were really another culture, another species that was intervening here for, I don't know, shits and giggles or whatever. It does destabilize everything that we stand on at that point in time, doesn't it?
I mean, it does, and that's one of the reasons that I think getting information like this out there is so important, because then if that is the case, then it's not such a big shocker.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of rabbit holes. There's a lot of rabbit holes that I kind of sit on the edge of. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, okay, well, that's really interesting, and it sounds like it could be true, but I'm going to hold judgment because I'm not feeling like there's enough evidence to fully support it. But if somebody coughed up that smoking gun, I'd be there, So the extraterrestrials, did come here and interfere with our genetic material, which myth totally supports. I mean, that's what the story says. I mean, I just convey the story. That's what the story says, and if some ET comes down and says, oh, yeah, we did this and we did this, I'd be with them,
Well, it makes sense, and I think in many ways sets us free from a lot of the restrictions we've placed upon ourselves because of trying to understand how it all happened. I mean, when I was in high school, I can remember, doing the Greeks and the Roman gods and the Norse and the Egyptians, and to me at the time, it felt like they were the same people with just different names. And, I didn't say so because, of course, that was probably not the right place or time to be trying to put it all together and understand what was going on. But now that I'm older, I can say a lot of things that I couldn't say when I was in high school. Besides that, it was ancient history anyhow. Now it's ancient history. It's even more ancient. But you did draw the... I'm 75.
Sorry.
Come on. It's we're talking a long time.
Come on, it's vintage history.
Okay. I'll go with vintage. But why couldn't you throw into the mix of the Greek and the Roman and the Egyptian and everybody just our concept of, quote unquote, the one God, because he was in the mix too. I mean, they all kind of, as human beings, do we need to have something that is over us, that created us, that we worship and that we ask for help and stuff like that? As a human society, do we?
But that's part that doesn't make any sense. I mean, think about this, Barbara. It's like, do you think your dog or your cat sits there and goes, oh, well, there's some guy out there in the sky who's watching over me all the time? I don't think so. You know what I mean? I don't think so. So why did we, at some point in time, thousands, and we're talking thousands, not 4,000, but thousands of years ago, I mean, we have evidence of circumcision or, potential evidence of circumcision going back 26,000 years. Okay, so that's a ritual that is done as part of an initiation rite into the service of manhood and God, and it was an edict from the gods. So we're talking, this stuff is ancient. So why would we decide one day, oh, we're stupid and we're going to submit ourselves to some unseen force because we have thunder in the sky? But we had thunder in the sky last week, but this week it's a god. I mean, it just doesn't make any logical sense to me, unless there was some guy in a flying chariot going through the sky and we're like, oh, yeah, that guy.
Oh, yeah. Well,
then it would make sense.
That. Well, one of the reasons that, well, not one of the reasons, but, Kinda. I became a teacher, and one of the perks to it, better to put it that way, one of the perks to it was when that classroom door was shut, for a time, I was God, literally. I said stuff, and they had to pay attention. I told them to do stuff, and they did it. And there is a sense of power. I mean, not a lot in a classroom of special ed kids, I will grant you, but it's a sense of power. And I'm wondering, did that enter into it at all? As these people from other places, came in to help, did they get off on the fact that they were being worshipped? Did they play off of it? Did they, was there something going on there other than, let's make somebody in our image and see what happens? I mean, I have personally always believed, though no proof, that a lot of the statues in Egypt, especially, the great big ones, they were not meant to depict somebody. They were actual life-size images of personages. They were not just blown up great big for no reason at all. They were life-size, and that quite perhaps those entities were that big. So,
well, I mean, you look at the gods that they made in Greece, and you look at imagery that comes out of Sumeria, and the gods are all giant size.
Yeah.
I mean, huge. And it's like, okay, so where did that convention come from? People go, oh, well, they were important, so they made them be big. And it's like, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it.
I'm not either.
I think that they were big, and then the tradition stayed over. So now if you're the god king or the king, you're represented as being big because we're holding that tradition. But the tradition started somewhere, and I think the tradition started because they were freaking giant size.
Yeah. That I'll buy.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think that, that things come from somewhere. Like, I don't understand how our ancestors, like in the Mahabharata, which one day I'll actually read, but it's probably one of the hardest reads I've ever tried to make. I've read the Ramayana. That was actually pretty good. Long, but good. It's tough, and they don't shut up, and they just don't move along. But anyway, but there are these battles that are happening, and aerial battles, and these weapons, and they're smithing people and doing all of this stuff. And it was written during a time where, maybe they had a bow and arrow.
Yeah.
And where did they come up with? And people were like, well, they used their imagination. It's like, that's pretty advanced imagination.
Well, I'm with you on that one because they found evidence of nuclear type stuff in the desert.
That's a little bit contested. I just had a whole long conversation with somebody about that.
Yeah, well, I kind of think that some of the things that took place actually did happen, and it's just that you describe things when you're describing things from your frame of reference, and if you don't have words for things like big weapon and yada yada, you explain it in terms that other people will understand. And look at the flying shields that Constantine spoke of. I think it was Constantine. Obviously some sort of flying object, but the only words that he had to use to describe it were flying shields. And I think that especially with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, come on, they found, how do you melt sand? if you don't have, high intensity something to create
Mm-hmm.
what is left. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be nuclear. It could be even better than nuclear, which, maybe not quite as destructive, but it will melt a city. But, it to me, it feels like we have deified people who really weren't deifiable.
Mm-hmm.
And although the stories are great, I mean, I love the stories and the archetypes and everything. They're really cool. But to make a religion out of it, to worship it, to listen to sometimes stories that have no fact behind them that try to control you in one way or another is not good.
Mm-hmm. But that's what they do. My big thing is that, and the message I want people to hear is that, this stuff came from somewhere. I mean, that is my fervent belief, that this stuff, this material, the stories of myth, the stories of old, the traditions that we hold, why do people get baptized, which is found in every culture? Why do people get married? Found in every culture. And the rules tied to it, same ones, found in every culture. I mean, why get married? Who came up with that? Scientists have identified, and this I found very interesting, so I had to watch the whole show because it was kind of talking about sex. But scientists have identified that certain animals, when they, it's been a really long time, but basically when they become pregnant or something like that, or when they have sex, that over a certain period of time, that their body produces this chemical and will kill off other sperm, okay, which puts out the notion that you're having sex with multiple partners, because it cuts down on the competition or whatever. Something to that effect. And again, it's been a really long time ago, and I wish I had that in my brain better. And human women have that capability, which implies that human women were not monogamous. And so if you're not monogamous, then, if that's not something that you want to have happen, then you have to have a whole marriage thing. But I go into a whole other speculation on why the law of marriage was put into place, which was an edict, because marriage was an edict from the gods, and all these laws tied to it and rules tied to it were edicts from the gods, I mean, 10 Commandments, edicts from the gods.
Oh, yeah.
And so wherever you look, there are these rule books and playbooks that we live by that were edicts from the God, and what happens if you don't follow one of the 10 Commandments? You're going to burn in hell, so there's always some kind of punishment tied to not following the rules, or not making reparation for not following the rules. And you see that same system being held in culture after culture after culture. I mean, that's the part that I find interesting.
I was especially interested in the section on the tattooing, how, married women were tattooed, or you weren't allowed to marry within your tribe, and therefore you could tell by somebody's tattoos whether they were in the same tribe, or whether there was the use of tattoos was really quite fascinating. And then you go into the frozen guy.
Otzi.
I forget what. Yes.
Otzi.
Well, his body was found frozen where?
In the Alps. In the Alps.
Okay. So this guy was frozen solid, and so he still had his skin. And what I found fascinating, really fascinating, were that the acupuncture points were almost circled on his body that would help to alleviate the pain and discomfort that he actually physically suffered from. And this skeleton goes back how many thousands of years?
2300 BC. You know,
okay,
so it is
so
the oldest. It is the oldest human remains with evidence of tattooing.
Amazing. Amazing that at that time, so we're going back 4,300 years. At that time, they were aware of places on the body that when put under pressure would relieve pain, would relieve discomfort, would relieve inflammation, whatever. And how did we lose it for 4,300 years?
Well, we didn't lose it. But we didn't lose it. It's been in China, you know, but we just don't do China because it's devil stuff. You know, my mom has Parkinson's, and so many years ago, you know, she was trying to do exercises because her mobility was starting to get impaired. And I thought it was great that she was trying to do like Tai Chi and yoga, not yoga so much because she wouldn't have had a hard time with the posture, but Tai Chi. Yeah. And my sister-in-law, who my brother and sister-in-law are pretty hardcore Christians, she told my mother that she shouldn't do it because it was devil stuff. Tai Chi.
I hope she didn't listen.
So my mom didn't do the Tai Chi, and I think it would have been the best thing for her because it was where she was physically. It would have been a very good thing for her to keep moving and more limber, you know. And yeah, she didn't do it because it was devil stuff. And I just was like, I mean, where do you come up with that? You know, because it's not, you know, I mean, Christianity doesn't have any exercise programs.
But,
and just because it's not Christian doesn't mean it's devil stuff.
Isn't it
kind of, or it's not good for you?
Isn't it upsetting that the gods gave us, you know, fire and weaving and making weapons and healing stuff. The gods gave us so much stuff, and now the God, singular, is telling us what not to use, what not to do. Is it the God telling us, or is it the men who are using God as their authority figure so that they can scare the population into something?
Oh, well, you already know the answer I'm going to say. So do I really need to say it? You know, and I'm going to make a commentary. Well, it's all about control, and it's all about power, and it's all about controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
You know, and do as I say and not as I do.
Oh.
You know, so, you know, and this is my opinion about the gods versus the God. You know, when you sit there and look at the Bible, in particular, starting in Genesis 1, and going to the flood narrative, okay? So just that chunk of Bible stories fit perfectly in the narrative that you find in every other culture on the planet. The timeline is the same. Key points in the stories are the same. They fall in the same chronology. However, and I'll use Greek mythology, you know, when you look at Greek mythology, you know, you have a war or a battle that happens between Uranus and his Titan sons, with Kronos castrating his father. And then we have Kronos taking over power and his son Zeus having a war with him and him beating Kronos and casting Kronos into the depths of Tartarus. Well, you can't have these stories. You can't have Inanna go into the underworld. You know, you can't have all of this stuff happening with all of these gods if there's only one God? So you start systematically deleting story after story after story after story, and, then you could throw in a couple of, like, angels and, the serpent, and you kind of make them like, we'll just, like, have this talking serpent. Yeah, that's it. And, and then there are several that suggest that the sky god, who is the judgmental kind of angry one, and the fertility god, who was the one that was ultimately responsible for the creation of humanity, they took those two characters and kind of wielded them into one, which is why the God of the Bible kind of looks a little schizophrenic.
Kind of. We're talking Old Testament here, very. Yes.
Old Testament, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, it is amazing how he had to go through therapy to get into the New Testament, probably. That's sacrilege, I realize, but,
No, he's really not in the New Testament. He doesn't really make an appearance.
No, but he's spoken of.
Spoken of, but doesn't make an appearance.
No, that's true. That's true, but doesn't...
so they can say whatever they want. By that time, religion was already totally dogmatized anyway.
No, well, that's true. That's true. But,
we're not dealing with any plain truth anymore.
I mean, I'm not saying, I want to make it real clear here that I'm not saying that I don't believe in a source of all creation, because I do. But a people person that did it, nah, not so much. Now, we helped
as I like
along
to say,
way.
There's the creator God, and then there's the God that's in the Bible, that's separate from the creator God, because they mention that guy. And so when you talk about that guy, that's not like the creator God. That's some extraterrestrial person. That used to be a bunch of people, but now it's just one guy.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me. A source, absolutely. A consciousness, absolutely. But not a person. And I think that's what hits us on a human level. It's so much more comforting to think that there is someone watching over us. And my whole thing when I talk with people is to explain that if you're looking for a purpose of life, if you're looking for a purpose for your spirit being here, it's to evolve and to grow. And it's, you're not here for other people, you're here for yourself and your own energy to grow and expand. And it to me that's easier than, if I do this or if I do that I will be punished. You'll probably have to pay for the consequences of your actions, absolutely, but not from a deity out there someplace that's going to strike you down. It's you have total responsibility, I believe. But
from a very energetic place, it's kind of like, so if all I'm doing is following the rules that have been imposed, then I may not be coming from my higher self. I think that, there were some original guidelines that were established for whatever reason, but rules help society function better, and rules propel things forward. But when we start talking about some of these other rules, it's kind of like, today, I'll use today as the example, it's like people hang on to them, but they're not really serving them or their higher purpose. To sit there and say, you can't do Tai Chi because it's devil work. Well, that's just a rule, and actually I have a better one. And it's actually not a religious rule, but it kind of illustrates the point. so, people that are vegetarian or vegan, they aren't going to eat any animal product. And so when you are talking about supplements, supplements normally will come in a gel cap. Everybody knows what a gel cap is. Well, a gel cap has gelatin in it, which is made from an animal product. And so I know there are a number of vegetarians or vegans who won't take the supplement in the gel cap because it has animal product. And they'll empty them out, or they will only take stuff that's in a pill or whatever, and it's kind of like, so their thinking is so rigid that keeping according to these rules that they have taken on is more important than them getting well. I mean, obviously, if there's alternatives that are going to give you the same results, great. But to sit there and go, oh, well, I can't take that. Even though, like fish oil, well, I can't take that. It's like, but if it's going to make you well.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's just, we society as a whole is at a place where I think there's a log jam, and it's kind of like we strive to go forward, but we are so bound by things that we have been taught that perhaps don't really apply to us in the way that they were intended initially. And so it's important to question, and I'm not saying I'm saying question, educate yourself, learn about things, and when it comes to a belief system, certainly whatever someone's belief system is, they're entitled to it, and I honor them. I use this show to sort of, in many ways, evolve my own belief system. And what I talk about and believe in at this moment in time, 3 weeks from now, check back with me. I may have found another piece of trivia that just opens the door for me and changes everything. But I think we need to be open-minded and open-hearted and be willing to listen and learn and assimilate what is appropriate for us at that particular point in time.
And what you were saying was just bringing up in my mind, there are some very challenging issues, that what might feel good to me or might feel right to me, society really frowns upon. And where do you draw that line, and what's coming to my mind? I mean, two things in particular are concepts like pedophilia. I mean, not that I'm a pedophile or anything like that, but if I were, there would be this compulsion to do it, with little kids, which to me is totally gross. But, for someone who is of that mindset, it's like they feel like it's their calling, like they're getting this message, I would assume that this is something that they should and want to do. And so what do you do with that? You know what I mean? I mean, so we're running into some stuff that's just weird and awkward, and, then there's the whole, late-term abortion thing, which, I'm sorry. I'm a pretty open-minded person, but I kind of have a lot of issues with that.
Yeah, I do, too. If there's life, it should be honored. I'm not sure exactly when life starts, but pretty sure it's not right before, it's way before birth. So, I have an issue with that too, and I guess it's a personal thing with everybody, but I am against making a law one way or another. However, if there's a heartbeat, then to me there's life. So, it's judgment, and I guess one can't impose their own philosophy on another to a degree, but if there's a human life involved, I want to get involved. if
yeah,
there's
I mean,
life,
I get really stuck where it's kind of like, but the baby could survive outside of the womb. At this point in time, that baby could survive outside of the womb. Prior to that, like if you just had had the baby, at like 5 months or 4 months or whatever, I mean, there's not any chance that baby's going to survive. You know what I mean? So even to me, personally, I think that's a little late. But there's not even a potential of survival happening. But at 8 months or 9 months is kind of like, excuse me?
Well, my philosophy is if you've waited that long, give the child a chance.
Give it up for adoption.
There are plenty of people out there that are just hungry, not hungry, bad word, but are wanting so badly to be parents. Why do that? It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, our culture is getting out of hand here, but I don't know if it's the culture or if it's the government. I don't know who to blame, but I do know that at the very, very bottom of the core of our spirits, that there is a humanity there that a lot of people aren't even expressing these days, and that it's a sad thing to think that we are so controlled by other forces that beauty inside of us is not able to manifest to the degree that it should. Hopefully. We're coming to a close here of a 2-hour conversation that I suspect could go on for another 2. But
no kidding.
But your website is soulhealer.com, and you are all over the place with writing and all sorts of other things. Is there something coming up currently that you want to put out there?
Let's see. Well, I mean, I'm working on a new book, but it's going to be a little bit before I'm done with that. And I don't have my, little spiel thing for it, so I'm just not even going to. Although it's a book more on personal healing, personal emotional healing, self-awareness and personal and emotional healing. I'll just leave it there for right now.
Okay.
Let's see. I have a conference in September I have to think about this, Memphis, and I would tell you what the name of it is, but I don't have that off the top of my head.
Well, I'll tell you something. If you're in Memphis in September, I'm currently moving to Nashville, so we'll have to get together.
Well, okay. Yeah, I'll be there. I think it's the weekend of September 21st, I think is the weekend.
I'll note that in my calendar.
Well, you should I think they have booths available. You should come and get a booth.
Oh. Well, let me just
send me
get
a
my
message.
house
I'll send you
first.
the information.
Okay, that's great. Well, I appreciate... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to put out that, all of my books and videos and stuff are available on soulhealer.com. If you order them from me versus buying it from Amazon, who take all your money, they do come autographed. So I'd appreciate that. Stepping Out of Eden and E.T. Chronicles, What Myth and Legends Have to Say About Mankind, are the 2 books we talked about primarily today.
Yeah, and they're well worth reading. They will. What's so cool is they'll open so many more questions to you. It's just unbelievable. But it gives you a foundation to work from. You make people think, and that's the important thing. But I so thank you for tonight, and would love to have you back on again, and certainly after the new book comes out, I'll stand in line and get a copy so we can expand on what we've created here, because I think this is only the start of an amazing dialogue that can help people understand a little bit better about where we come from and how we came, and hopefully totally confuse everybody. And Mark is just I'll kill him when I co-host with him. I give him a countdown of when it's time to say goodnight, and he just told me it's time to say goodnight, Barbara. So thank